All right, so we are live. Hello and welcome to August MobLab Live conversation. It's the sixth conversation of 2018, and we are very, very excited to convene a conversation on another important topic, which is so relevant to campaigners these days. My name is Aprajita, and I work with the Mobilization Lab. As folks are joining in, please feel free to introduce yourself on the YouTube chat room. Please tell your name, organization, where are you from, and if this is your first MobLab Live session that you're joining. Today's MobLab Live conversation is about understanding and discussing how cultural campaigning shifts status quo and how can it help us win. And we have an incredible group of guest speakers with us, and I'm so excited and thankful to have you all join us. They're working at the intersection of arts, culture, and social change. And I'm thrilled to talk more about their work, lessons, and examples of different interventions and the work that they have done with respect to using culture as a tool for social change. I welcome Dr. Toby Jenkins, who is an associate professor at the University of South Carolina. Her work focuses on culture as politics of social survival and tool for social change. Masih Alinejad, who is the renowned journalist, author, and founder of My Stealthy Freedom. My Stealthy Freedom is a movement against compulsory hijab in Iran, and she has recently authored a book named The Wind in My Hair, dealing with her journey to create this movement. And we have Dr. Paul Kuttner, who is the Associate Director at the University of Neighborhood Partners, University of Utah. Paul's focus throughout the years has been on community-based, culturally sustaining approach to engaging low-income communities of color. And he also blogs at culturalorganizing.org, which is a fantastic space for you to learn more about this topic. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Jenkins, Paul, and Masih. A very, very warm welcome to all of you on our behalf. And I hope, friends, you have tuned in by now. It's an hour-long conversation, and we will take questions in the last 15 minutes of the session. So feel free to share your thoughts, ask questions on the YouTube chat room, which must be either on the bottom right or the top right of your screen. And tweet your questions and thoughts to us using the hashtag MobLabLive. So to begin with, the reason we are hosting this conversation has been because there's been an increasing shift in campaigning and advocacy efforts where arts and culture in campaigning is becoming more and more relevant. And we are seeing that being used as an important strategy. We are seeing use of pop culture, folk culture, fictional characters, narratives, memes, symbols, etc., to engage wider community and to shift public perceptions on various issues. My job in the next 55 minutes or so is to unpack this whole term as much as we could, cultural campaigning, cultural organizing, and to understand what it means. What are some of the lessons and successful examples that we can go back to? And how are people using culture to advocate for social change? Of course, with the work of Masih, Dr. Paul, and Dr. Jenkins. But if you have any other examples of the work that you have done, please share that on the YouTube chat room with your peers who have joined this conversation. So without wasting any more time, Dr. Kuttner, Dr. Jenkins, and Masih, I'll just start with a rapid fire round with like a question, and I would love for all three of you to respond. And maybe we can start with you, Masih, as you're the first person on my screen panel right now. How would you define and explain elements of cultural campaigning? How is it different or similar to other campaigning efforts of 21st century from your experience and your work perspective?
So I am going to be the first one speaking here right now. This is my first experience actually joining this event, and I'm so excited. Yes, my name is Masih Alinejad, and I have been working as a journalist for 10 years in my homeland, Iran, where being a journalist means that you're risking your life. But being a female journalist means that you're risking your life double, twice, and it's not easy. So, but I started my campaign against compulsory hijab when I left Iran. So it was just because my main focus was about politics, and I've been brainwashed that my body, my choice comes, second. It's not as important as political challenge. I just shared a picture of myself, and I started to talk about, how important it is when I feel the wind in my hair, without, being oppressed, without being followed by morality police. And I thought, it's just a personal experience, but I received a lot of emails, a lot of comments on the comment section on my Facebook page, that women were expressing themselves and, talking about cultural pressure as well. It's not just the government. It's just not, because of the law. It's not just a political pressure. So that is why I launched my campaign, and I invited women to talk about their own experiences, to, express themselves, that how being your true self, is important for you, and what kind of a struggle and challenge that you experienced in your life. So my campaign now has like 1 million followers on Facebook, and almost 2 million followers on Instagram and Twitter, Telegram. So I use social media to give the platform to women who already had a voice inside Iran, but they never had a platform to get together. So I use different kind of hashtags to get, together under the same umbrella, because when we are together, then we are stronger. So, but this campaign actually teaches us a lesson, that you cannot get successful if you have only one target, which is, some people think this is the restrictive laws. You have to challenge the laws. You have to challenge the government. Then you're going to get successful. This is wrong. That was actually my, mistake as well. My challenge was like fighting against the Islamic Republic, fighting against the government. It's the only path that we can reach our goal. But through this campaign, we learned a lot of lessons that, the most important one is like, make your issue, women's rights issue, an issue for men, an issue for those women who choose to wear hijab as well. Like, we are fighting against compulsory hijab, forced hijab, but don't think this is only your issue. The other women who choose to wear hijab, this is an insult to them as well. How you can use social media, how you can, use like all the platform and utility that you have on internet to make this issue an issue for men, an issue for those women who choose to wear a hijab, an issue for those women and men who are not living in your homeland. You can talk to them and make them understand that this is a global issue. So this is how I, use social media to make the whole world understand that we are right now in 21st century, living in a country, having a cultural debate, which is really like important for the rest of the world to understand, because this is the first step for all women around the world to gain their rights, to be their true self. It's not a small issue, unlike, many other feminists around the world think that we have so many bigger problems. This is a small issue. So we have to make the rest of the world, understand, and being aware of what's going on in Iran or some countries in the Middle East. It's not an internal matter. It's not a small issue. And this is my campaign. I thought we have to explain first, to the rest, to our community in Iran, that the first step toward full equality is just you to empower yourself, feel empowered, gain your voice and your voice and your platform back from the government, and then create a free debate among society and have a cultural daily debate with other people who always during the history thought that this is not our issue, and then you are successful.
Wonderful. Thanks, Masih, for sharing that. And I would love to dig deep into some of your experiences and lessons. And I think what you are talking about is actually something which has been a social norm and practice in the society. You actually challenge that culture using the popular technology and trends that the generation was actually leveraging upon.
Yeah, so later on, I'm going to explain that how men were thinking that my body has something to do with their honor. So through social media and cultural debate, we change this tone of the existent conversation in society.
Thank you, Masih. I will come back to you after this round, and let's move on to Dr. Kuttner. Dr. Kuttner, how would you define and explain elements of cultural campaigning, and how do you see that being similar or different from what's going on in 21st century campaigning?
That's a good question. Thank you so much for having me on here. This is really exciting to be on with these amazing guest speakers. That's a really hard question because I've had the honor of speaking with or working with and learning about so many different culturally oriented approaches to social change, and they're very, very diverse. There's a lot of different approaches, and I can talk later a bit about I've been trying to sort of think through the sort of what are the different assumptions and underlying theories that make them so different. I will say, I think overall, cultural organizing or cultural campaigning is about recognizing that culture is sort of the fabric that holds us all together, and all of the politics and all of the discourse is rooted in questions of culture, and that they're not separate. I know here in the US there's a lot of people, especially right now, kind of post Trump election, that are trying to divide kind of real economic and social issues from identity politics, or things that are seen as sort of not as important. And I think cultural organizing is about understanding that you can't effectively do organizing without taking into account culture. And in fact, that what we think of as sort of traditional non-cultural organizing approaches, like community organizing or movement organizing, they are cultural. There's just sometimes they're rooted in a culture that's not being very explicit. And that culture, that way of going about social change, doesn't always work for everybody. And so, I think it's really exciting to me to see, as with a background in arts and arts education, it's exciting for me to see how much this has grown, how much more dialogue there is about cultural change. And I think it comes out in a few different ways. There's kind of the large scale public, what you're calling cultural campaigning. I think that's really intriguing. Really being thoughtful about the symbols and narratives and frames and images that are put out into the world, and how that can shift discourse and actually lead to more sustainable change than just changing a law that may or may not be implemented. I also think there's a lot of pieces that I'm really excited about that are less visible, but the ways that people are using cultural practices to build smaller communities and build power in communities, and connection and social capital, and the shared vision for the future that you need to do this kind of work. And I also think there's a really individual, personal level that this work is about individual empowerment and consciousness raising, and coming to understand ourselves and our place in the world differently. So there's a lot of levels of the work. It's all very exciting. I think the best examples usually connect them. The individual experience and the kind of strong community cohesion is connected to the large picture. It's not just coming up with it's not the same thing as the politician coming up with like a crafty slogan and a good advertising. There's some similarities. We're both thinking about image and symbol, but I think with Masih, that story I think really shows how it's not always a strategy a bunch of people in a room got together and thought of something well. It's about a true story, a true narrative connected to individuals that's put into the world in a more public way, and that is connected to what eventually becomes a big public statement and a book title and all of that. But it started with real lived experience. So to me, cultural organizing is also about connecting strategy to our real personal and lived experiences, and not separating those two.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably enough for now.
Thank you, Dr. Kuttner. That was really insightful. Dr. Jenkins, what would you say?
Yes, well, again, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to convene again with these fantastic folks and really learn more. I'm already energized and excited and taking my own notes. So I hope everyone that's tuned in is doing the same. For me, I think what kind of compels me or pulls me with cultural campaigning is that it's rooted in creative imagination. And just personally, that's an important part of my life, right? So, you know, professionally, I started in public relations and advertising and everything. And so in all of the iterations of my professional life, that aspect of who I am, that pulls in the creativity, is always important. And so that's one of the things that I love most about my own culture. But, you know, when I think about, you know, what does it mean to you know, for cultural campaigning and everything, it's about utilizing those things that I think we typically associate with creativity, right? So I think it's easy to immediately talk about arts because we expect artists and art spaces to be creative. But it also used various other forms of accessible creative public scholarship. And so things like social media or being able to use digital storytelling and things like that, whatever, or open community spaces, reimagining what spaces can be and what they can function for and what they can look like, to educate and raise awareness. But for me also, I think it's a really interesting play on or navigating goodness and, as Masih said, the fight, right? And so, because for me, culture is inherently about goodness. So several years ago, I did a study of university, of college students, and particularly ethnically diverse college students. I spent many years running university cultural centers. And so I thought, if we are going to create culture for students on campus, we need to understand how they understand culture and its utility in their lives, not the perspective that we bring. And so one of the most salient things that came out of that work was how students interpreted or explained culture to be different from the oppressive issues that they face, like racism and classism, et cetera, right? And so in many ways, culture was the thing that taught them how to navigate those things. It was the thing that got them through those things. If I compared it to like a shelter, culture was the shelter from the storm. And so in that way, culture is all about really goodness and in many ways love. And I'm not talking about like a foo-foo, love each other, let's love each other type of ideal, but rather how can I help others to experience a love-filled life? And what a love-filled life looks like is abundance, health, stability, safety, joy, economic security, job security, functional families, right? Freedom, personal freedoms. That's what a love-filled life kind of looks like. And so as I worked on various university campuses, creating essentially educational initiatives that could be considered cultural campaigns or cultural programs or whatever that basically used culture to advance change. One thing that I was determined to do was to avoid allowing the goodness of culture to be drowned in the ugliness of the things that we were trying to tackle, right? So those issues for me, they needed to be tackled, but they didn't deserve the spotlight. And so what I mean is that I feel they deserve the hot seat and not the spotlight, right? The spotlight should be reserved for us to showcase what we imagine life should be, what the laws, the policies, what change should look like. And for me, that's what's so dope about culture. It's rooted in this creativity and the ability to create. And so while I created these spaces that allow for the critique of society, I dress them in the richness and the dopeness of our culture. And it's about creating these spaces of, even if it's online, like Masih was saying, communion and you know, coming together and everything. That's some of the goodness of culture. I'm actually a a breast cancer survivor. And one of the things that I've gotten from that experience, you know, when the language that people use when they talk about cancer is, you know, you're going to fight it. You're going to, you know, you're going to battle it. You know, it's all these negative type of language around it. But what I know is that in any battle, there are casualties on both sides. So if you go into, you know, with cancer, you can see chemotherapy as the soldiers at war that go in to fight cancer or whatever. But the result of that is that your body is wiped out too. Good cells are also killed. And when we go in trying to fight some of these social issues, we will drain ourselves, we'll experience activist fatigue, we'll kill parts of our spirit being so focused on the fight. And so that's where I think it's the beauty of cultural campaigning lies, in that we can still use these spaces of goodness to tackle and address and explore these issues. That's why I think when I heard Masih talking about her win through my hair, you know, that campaign or whatever, like when you really drill down to it, we can all identify with the loveliness of feeling the wind in our hair, right? And that's what makes it compelling. It's that loveliness of that experience that we understand and that we do want other people to experience that makes the campaign so compelling.
Right. Let's actually continue with you, Dr. Jenkins, because I think you know, some elements of what you're talking about and what makes it different. I think it's very related to the question that I have for you is, from your work on cultural leadership and identities, what are some of the lessons learned on what works and what doesn't when using culture to advocate for change? Because a lot of questions, you know, a lot of people who have signed up are also very curious to know what are the pitfalls, what are the things that, you know, we should be aware of, what is working and what doesn't work.
Yeah. So yeah, and so I don't know if I don't know if I can say if I'm the authority on saying what works and, you know, it doesn't work, because it's really just a matter of it being different for each individual community, each person, you know, whoever's taking up the cause, you know. And even as I was kind of thinking about this whole topic a few days ago, and I was thinking about just the word campaign and the kind of pressure in today's world of true mass media, where everyone has access to put out through the media whatever they like, which is very different from years ago where you had to pay for advertising and things like that. And there becomes this like social pressure of, well, this campaign doesn't have 1 million, you know, views, or, you know, the YouTube channel isn't that popular and everything. And is this viable? But when you look at the word campaign and even looking at it from the political realm that's kind of co-opted the word campaign, where now when we hear campaign, we just think politics and stuff like that. But even in that realm, people tend to galvanize around it, particularly in the United States, the national campaign, the presidency, right? And so everybody's all up in arms and actively engaged in the big one, right? But then when it comes to local politics, they fall off. They're less engaged. They may not come out, you know, as much. But what we know is that essentially some of those more local campaigns and those local debates or whatever are where the power lies, right? Because that's where your the power in Congress and Senate, et cetera, in the United States, that's where the decisions are made. So they are as important as that bigger one. And so when you look at the whole idea of cultural campaigning and everything, whatever, I do want to say that it's really important to value the local, the small, the individual little, you know, campaigns, whatever, the things that a kid or a student might create on, you know, their own site or whatever, and that it only goes viral in their school and students are talking about it. They're wonderful. You know what I'm saying? That's a community that's talking and engaging. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be, what do you have to do to make this a huge success or a big global phenomenon or a national phenomenon, et cetera. But again, I think my particular cultural campaigning space is I do a lot of different things because I'm a professor, and I can talk about that a little bit later. But my as an artist myself, my particular cultural campaigning space is of choice is spoken word, right, and open mics. And so that's a very local experience. That's a very because it's limited by physical space. And a lot of times I serve as an arts administrator and an artist creating and performing at open mics. And I see these as highly political spaces of social advocacy. But I try to make them spaces where we can lovingly challenge one another, right? So it's still rooted, again, in this goodness, in this vibe of community, where we can speak truth to power and we can yell and scream and curse, but the room is still filled with this spirit of love. And that's an interesting thing to be able to create, but it seemingly works every time. There's something about convening through culture that allows people to hear different ideas and everything. But I think that artists are still responsible for the art that they produce, and that's a complicated thing. Right, when you're using arts as for advocacy and social action, because a lot of times I think artists want to have a creative license, right? That I'm not responsible for my art. That I put it out and what happens and everything or whatever. But when you're dealing with some of these such critical issues, I do think artists have responsibilities to get it right. In the same way that our journalist colleagues do. Like they feel compelled to make sure that they're fact checking, that they're rethinking, that they're critically thinking, that they're looking at it from different perspectives, that they're not just solely putting out feeling and opinion, et cetera, whatever, that it needs to be rooted in some realness. And so in that way, the ways that these cultural campaigns have an ability to be heard by so many different people. I do think there's a piece of it where there needs to be a push for responsibility in what's created. And it's because it's not just pure entertainment. It's not just art for art's sake when you're dealing with issues like this.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's so true because a lot of the challenges that campaigners in our network and activists in our network are talking about is also like, how do you actually create something which is locally impactful, but as well as like it makes sense? It doesn't like, because it sort of also has a limitation to sort of offend communities. But, just like how do you actually take care of producing what you're producing in terms of image or narrative or fiction, stuff like that. That's so true. And I think just a bit on what you briefly introduced, Dr. Jenkins, was your work on, your work with open mic spaces and hip hop activism, which, we discussed when we met last week. Can you share a bit more about that? Like what happened? Like, how did you actually engage people, mobilize them?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something I've actually been doing for some time. So I recently, colleagues and I wrote a book called The Open Mic Night, really exploring this because I think what's interesting about open mics on college campuses is that they've been happening for years. But I think purely as entertainment, like student life, social experiences, but not a whole lot being done to really wrestle with how these spaces become the designated spaces on campus where students can actually, again, advocate for change and speak out on social issues. And particularly when you look at educational institutions, and college campuses are no different in some ways than some schools where there's a culture of compliance, and the response to student protests can sometimes be negative and everything. And so in some ways, those spaces become really important spaces where the institution is allowing space for students to speak truthfully and to speak truth to power, and to not edit their words, to say what they need or want to say, and and it's okay for them to do it. And so when we were pulling together that book, I, created my first open mic at the University of Maryland in like 1998. And so that was, 20 years ago. And as I was writing the book last year, I went back on the internet to kind of look at, is that still there? And it was. I was amazed that that program was still running for 20 years. And so even in that, we're looking at, okay, what is so compelling about these kind of spaces of hip hop pedagogy and open mic, spoken word, et cetera, that 20 years later, students are still engaged, actively engaged in it because it's so important to them. And again, I think because they're in educational institutions, there aren't that many spaces where students can just be free to speak how they want to speak, to, again, like I said, yell, curse, scream, whatever they want to do, laugh, cry, however they want to do it, to do it. And so in that way, I think they're healthy spaces. And so I've created them at every institution that, I've probably worked at. I create some type of thing. And again, my thing is that understanding these spaces is not just one-time event, because the reality is that more conversations can be had after the open mic. An idea or even an issue can be sparked. Someone can learn about something and go and look and become more involved with it, whatever. In some ways, these are like mini speech campaigns that you're allowing, students to engage in. And so it's advocacy. And though we aren't necessarily tracking, what have been the result of, the audience members that leave these spaces. I know for sure that that they're meaningful and that they probably do spark some type of energy and motivation in the folks that attend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. We'll come back to you with a couple of questions that we might have from the audience. But for now, I'm going to move to Masih. And Masih, the question that I have for you is also very related to one of the questions that we have had from Thomas. Because your campaign actually is fighting against a social norm and practice in Iran, which is actually, you're combating this negative aspect of the culture that undermines human rights and freedom. So tell us more about how you did what you did.
First of all, I really enjoyed and learned from both of you, and I want to just talk about my own experiences. Where, I learned that what is not really working in social campaigning is making only one person as a leader of campaign. I was on the target when I launched the campaign. The Iranian State TV actually made several programs against me, saying that Masih is a corrupted woman, Masih is paid by Western government, Masih is against betraying the country, a traitor, a whore, a prostitute, so many, and I actually made a program on Iranian State TV and saying that Masih Alinejad was raped by 3 men in the street of London, in a subway, which was a big lie. But what they want to do, actually, targeting one person, discrediting the, in Iran, we're saying that bringing shame on one person, who is leading the campaign, to shut down the campaign. So I decided actually to announce that and make every individual person who sending videos and photos to participate in the campaign, making them a leader and telling them that, you are the one actually leading the movement within the society. And so that actually helped. How? When every individual person think that they are the leader and they don't need to follow another person, that gives them the power. That actually empowers them a lot to leading the movement within the society, going to other individual person and talking to them and bringing more other people. But how, I use that again. In Iran, if you're going to have not in Iran, so many countries like in the Middle East, when you're running a movement, the government can easily oppress organization. They can easily oppress, go and shut down a newspaper, or shut down an organization, or arrest a group of women's rights activists, arrest journalists, bloggers, campaigners. But they cannot go and arrest every individual person who became their own agency, who became their own leader. So that actually worked on my campaign. And another thing, because you asked a great question, that what works, what doesn't work. In this campaign, and bringing all individual people to feel that they own the campaign, I don't think that making one person as a leader works. So that is why I always attack journalists and media when they say Masih is the leader of the campaign. I say, no, we are the leader of this campaign, and we really are. And I'm going to just give you one example. When the Iranian government actually brought my family on a state TV to disown me publicly, my sister actually, was on the TV and saying that I don't know Masih. She's not my sister anymore. There was a girl from our campaign, White Wednesday's campaign. She wrote on her Twitter, "We don't care you bring Masih's sister. If you bring Masih on TV," and she regrets about all she has been doing so far, we don't care, because this campaign has so many leaders, and I am one of them. So that actually shows how we can get successful if we make every individual person who engaged with the campaign to be the leader of the campaign. So another thing is, I don't think that if you go with one hashtag and one discourse and one narrative, that you can get successful in social, cultural change, cultural campaigning in Iran. That is actually why I invite every individual person to give different ideas, and I talk about my own experience to give different hashtags. So I think if you really want to be successful in cultural campaigning, you have to come with new initiative every other month. And I'm going to give you another example about my own experience. When we had like my Stealthy hashtag, which was like women taking a headscarf off in public and sending a photo and challenging the freedom, which became Stealthy secret in Iran. So exposing your Stealthy freedom and sending your photo to the campaign, that was the first step. But after 3 years, we used this hashtag. I thought that this was the time we have to shift the online movement to something offline. So I created another hashtag called White Wednesday. So I picked the color white, and I picked the date, Wednesday, and I asked people if they want to identify each other, then they can, wear a white symbol or hold a white headscarf in public to meet each other, identify each other, and that. That was just after 3 years. But in between, how could I just have, the movement alive and fresh, and not people, helping people not get bored? Like, we don't want to repeat ourselves for 3 years. So I started to create new initiatives every other month, every 3 months, which one of them was like my forbidden voice. Women are not allowed to sing solo in Iran. So I started to sing myself, publish it on social media to make people understand that this is about you. Don't think that this is about just professional singers. It's about you, and your voice is forbidden. So share your video. I got a lot of videos from women, and they were like, practicing their civil disobedience. Yeah, you're saying that my voice is forbidden, I'm gonna sing. Or another one, which was about men in hijab, as I said to you, making men involved in this movement, that this is about you. If I fight against compulsory hijab, that doesn't mean it's my issue. This is an insult to all men. When the government of Iran is saying that if you don't force your wife, your sister, your mother, or your girlfriend to wear hijab, that means, you are a dishonorable man. So that is an insult to you. They actually, government saying that you have to use violence against your female relative to make yourself, showing yourself an honorable man. So this is like happening in 21st century. This is an insult to you. You have to join us. And then I was like bombarded by men showing their solidarity. So that is Men in Hijab hashtag shows you that how when men feel that this is our campaign, not women's rights campaign, not just women's issue, then you can get successful. You can create a huge debate in society about cultural change. Because our foreign minister said that in France, that wearing hijab is a cultural issue. Nobody should interfere in our cultural issue and internal matter. Then I thought, he's a man. He doesn't understand how it means to be forced, even it's a culture. So I photoshopped him in hijab. And I said that, look, if you think this is a cultural issue, how do you feel being forced to wear it? So then men started to wear hijab and sending their photos. One of the video actually got 12 million views. So it was not my issue. It was not women's issue. It was a global issue. It was, like men and women standing together. It was so beautiful, as you said, Dr. I'm wrong, which one of you said that we have to, care about the arts and the beauty of cultural campaigning as well. So, and another hashtag which I created was, my camera is my weapon. Again, I just started from my personal experience. I got attacked by a pro-government, citizen in London. He was from Iran. But he was in Iran, stopping me in the Gatwick airport and telling me that, why you're ruining the image of Iran? And he called me ugly woman. So I first explained to him that I'm just, criticizing the bad culture. I'm criticizing the discriminatory laws. I'm criticizing the restrictive laws. So I am basically criticizing the Islamic Republic of Iran and some of the, bad culture. That doesn't mean I'm ruining the reputation of my country. That doesn't mean I'm ruining the image of my own beloved homeland. He left, but I was like, it was in my mind that he called me ugly, but I think I'm beautiful. So I used my camera. I just ran after him and I said that, you just called me ugly. Just, can you say that on my camera? So he ran away. He was saying like, no, I didn't say that you're ugly. I said that it's ugly. So he changed his word. And I thought that this camera worked. So I invited all women to use their camera if they're experiencing any harassment in public, in the street. It worked. So now women are walking in public, unveiled, but using their camera to expose violence, which we have been experiencing that like for years and years, but through victimizing women, saying that, oh, we always getting, attacked by men, poor us, we always being humiliated by men, or we receiving a lot of hate messages from, men in the street. That doesn't work. You have to show them that you have the power to stand up for your rights, and you have the power to say no. That works in using the camera works. So right now, I'm going to just give you one example. One of the women actually used her camera to saying other women who were using violence and attacking them and saying that, cover yourself. So the woman started to film and she sent the film to me and I published it. You won't believe me. In one day, the video got 5 million views. In 2 days, 6 million. And now it almost 9 million views just on my social media, my Instagram. So the video is everywhere around the world. And that actually shows you that when you create new hashtag, when you give the leadership to people that you are the leader, you are not a victim, you can, create a cultural debate in society. You can actually talk to the person who are using violence against you on your, camera. You are the one actually became your own media. You are the one actually became your own leader. You are the one who became your own storytellers. That actually the way you break the censorship. For 40 years, we never had the chance to go on Iranian state TV, to go on all our, official media to talk about our body, to talk about hijab issue. But right now, everyone in Iran, they're talking about the taboo, compulsory hijab. Around the world, people are talking about us. But if I have a time, I'm going to give you the last example. Can I do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Last example, that around the world, we're being like, told by the Western feminists that this is a small issue, this is an internal matter, this is a cultural issue, we don't want to touch it. So there were so many misunderstandings about our cause and our campaign. Again, we created a new hashtag to tell them that if it's a culture to force a 7-year-old girl to wear hijab, or if it's a culture to force non-Muslim women to wear hijab, if it's a culture to force non-Iranians who visit my beautiful country to wear hijab, then what is your responsibility as a feminist? You have to get involved. During the apartheid, you couldn't just say that, this is not my issue. Or, you see the racism act in society, you don't care where it happens. You never said this is, racism, it's part of some people's culture. Compulsory hijab, it's a discriminatory law. And we had to get the attention of all feminists around the world to make them understand that we don't want to be saved. We want to save you, the Western feminists, to understand that talking against a discriminatory law doesn't make you Islamophobic. We want to save you from this misunderstanding, to keep the sisterhood and stand up for women's rights everywhere. Doesn't care about the color, doesn't care about the country, where if it's in France, it's in America, even it's in the Middle East. You have to stand up and talk about it. You can't say that this is an internal matter, this is a cultural issue. No, this is a discriminatory law. So how we get them involved? We created a new hashtag called "See You in Iran Without Hijab." So, and we invited all the tourists to join us. And we gave them an example. We told them that if our female politicians come to your country and you force them to take off their hijab, or you telling them that this is our culture, you have to drink alcohol, they would stand up for their rights. They would say that no, and they would stand up for their religious values. So then you have to do the same. If you go to Iran, challenge a discriminatory laws, doesn't matter if it's a culture, issue, or it's a discriminatory law, or you're forced by the government. You have to talk about it. If you go to some country and they say that we worship the cow, so then right now you have to worship the cow. Our government wouldn't do that. Nobody would do that. But our government are doing right now this to all female athletes. If there is a tournament in my country, you have to cover your hair. Why? Because the government tried to make you, having this idea that this is a cultural issue, you have to respect the culture. You shouldn't respect any culture who abuse women's rights. Never. So right now, this became an issue. And, an athlete from India, another chess champion from United States of America, they joined this movement and saying that if women are forced to wear hijab, we are not going to attend to this tournament, because this is kind of abusing women by saying that this is a culture issue or this is a law. So I want to say, to make the longest story short, we have to make every individual person around the world, within the society, men or women, those women who wear hijab, those women who choose to wear hijab, or those women who hate to wear hijab, understand that this is 21st century. And if we want to have a cultural debate, we shouldn't say that this is an internal matter, this is a cultural issue, this is a sensitive issue. Be brave enough and lead the movement yourself. This is how we got successful. And now our movement is like, of course, the law hasn't changed yet, but nobody is waiting for the law to be changed. Nobody, honestly, nobody is waiting for compulsory hijab laws to be removed. They remove it themselves. They're talking about it. And that is actually how we get successful to break the censorship.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Masih. That was super powerful. There's so many lessons that you just talked about, and so many insights that an audience might have questions, and I'll come back to you if they have that. But let me move on to Dr. Kuttner for now. And Dr. Kuttner, given your work for the past few years has so much about being as a theater educator, cultural organizer, research, and your work has focused a lot on hip hop activism. How do you think culture helps in building power, building community power, and leveraging the same to shift status quo? And if you can share examples from your research to highlight that piece, that would be super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's tough to follow. I'm very humbled to be on this call. That was a really inspiring and very on point explanation of what does and doesn't work in organizing and the value of culture. And that's very energizing. And it's great to be here with Dr. Jenkins too, whose work in cultural leadership has really influenced what I'm about to talk about, I would say. When I was becoming a researcher, I was moving from being a theater educator to studying cultural organizing. I think it's a good question. I do think that the sort of let me think. Or any kind of organizing, any kind of social change work is about power. And I think culture can play a role in building power in a lot of ways. And I actually think here in the U.S. there's a lot of organizing, particularly political organizing, that doesn't take culture into account, and I think struggles for it to actually connect people together. I think people may be interested in a cause, but to get them to come together and build sustained relationships that are necessary to have power, you need to think about the cultural ties and practices that bind them. So some of my research and my own passion has been in hip hop activism and cultural organizing. I did have the honor of being able to be part of Project Hip Hop, which was a youth hip hop cultural organizing group in Boston. And I probably, there's a lot I could say about it, but just in terms of kind of the role culture played in building power before getting to the cultural campaigning and the public face of the work, I think there's a few lessons. One is, the idea of cultural organizing needs to come from inside the community that is being impacted and seeking change. It's not something that can be imposed with creative symbols and hashtags. It needs to be true to the individuals. So you need to create a space. I think open mics are often one of them, and those kind of open shared spaces where people can share their actual experiences and stories, because that's where it starts. So I think a lot about Dr. Jenkins was talking about kind of the beauty of culture, and I think I usually refer back to Dr. Tara Yasso, who talks about cultural wealth and this idea that lots of cultures, particularly cultures that have been marginalized and kept out of the spotlight, and have enormous sources of wealth in them. But as Masih said, cultures are complicated, and they are changing, and they have negative aspects and things that don't really support efforts for justice. And so I think there's a process of looking at a group looking at a shared culture, sort of who are we together, and what are the pieces of our culture that are valuable to us and important to us, and that's what you build on. And then also having some really critical discussions about what are the aspects of our culture that we are not so comfortable with, or we think need to be challenged, or need to be discussed, or need to be evolved. So at Project Hip Hop, just to ground it in that example, I think Project Hip Hop spent a lot of time looking at hip hop culture and analyzing, using songs, using practice, using movies and documentaries, really trying to work with the young people who are all high school aged and early college. What is hip hop all about? The learning about the power and how integral hip hop has been to efforts for social change, for putting new voices and perspectives into public discourse, but also how it struggled with questions of sexism and hyper-consumerism and homophobia and other pieces, and what they felt about that. And not everyone felt the same. So, creating these spaces to be critical about that before going out and doing something, and not having kind of an idealistic or too solidified view of what culture is. I think there's a lot of talk about culture out there that talks about culture as if it's an unchanging thing, if it's traditions that were created long ago, and that's still what it is. And so certainly, or that kind of idealizes one culture rather than taking a critical look at it. And I don't think you're really ready to go out and do the more public work until you've had those conversations, whatever conclusions you come to. I also think, organizing, so that's sort of on the individual level to some extent, and kind of, or the group consciousness level. I think there's also, the next step is building community. You need community, connected people who see themselves as having a shared past and a shared future, and that they're tied to each other, even if they don't always like each other, they're tied to each other. And that you can look to your own cultural wealth to find the tools to build that. So in hip hop, that was all about the cipher, the space where hip hop artists gather in a circle, and it's often either rapping or dancing or poetry, and battling it out in this space where everyone has a chance, and where there is kind of this real sense of skill and passion and commitment are highly valued. Everyone's individual voice is valued, but you also have to back each other up, and you support each other and make beats for one another. And that structure, that practice, that cultural form was a powerful space for that group to build its community and build its connections, both literally through just informal ciphers that would sprout out, but also making sure to structure everything they did in terms of these circle practices, and talking about how circle practices are connected to lots of cultures in lots of long-running traditions in Africa, in the Americas, indigenous communities, and making those connections. And using that as a start for building their community. So, and then it's really those pieces need to be in place to some extent before this kind of external speaking and using, and that before you go out and create new narratives. And this group would use hip hop and theater performance in the streets as their main tool when I was with them. So those were really powerful, and they used those to support local organizing efforts, working with other youth groups. But the stories they used in those pieces, and the awareness they had, and the critical mindset they had, came out of all that prior work. All of it was connected to culture, but much of it wasn't very public. And I think one thing that they did was they didn't just come in with a set curriculum on hip hop culture. Mm. I think they started with the youth and their understanding of their culture. And that was very clear to me because, I was into hip hop when I was young, but when I got to Project Hip Hop, I didn't know half the stuff they were talking about. I mean, the dances have changed, the local artists have changed. It's evolving. And I think there's a mistake out there. Well, one mistake is trying to do something like, I think hip hop pedagogy and hip hop organizing is really powerful. You can't just do it with people because they're young and you assume they all love hip hop. There's a lot of youth culture. So they really started with them, I think, and that's key. Starting with the people in the room and their specific stories and the specific skills they have, and going from there, because you just can't impose anything. I think cultural organizing, much like regular organizing, I would argue, but perhaps even more so, simply can't come from the top down. It just won't connect.
Right. And yeah, I think that's pretty much a common thread that, what Masih and, even Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Kuttner, you're talking about. And I just have a minute to wrap this session, but I do have an interesting question, and maybe we can just, Dr. Kuttner, it would be great if you can quickly respond to that, or maybe whoever feels comfortable. But how do we know if culture is really changing and we are contributing or not? It's a question from one of our viewers. And I mean, that's some, I think Dr. Jenkins briefly touched on that, but how do you measure it? How do you see that? But how do we know if culture is really changing and we are contributing or not? What has been some of your experiences?
As a researcher, it's a question I've thought a lot about, and I think it's very difficult because culture changes slowly. I think it also depends on what your theory of cultural change is. Looks like Masih has some comments. I'm going to pass over.
I'm always hopeful. So that's why I want to give you the example. From the beginning, when we launched the campaign against compulsory hijab, you know, as you said, that the change was really, cultural change was really slow. But from the beginning, I received a picture from a woman, and but from her back. So she was scared of the government. No, she sent me the picture and she said that I cannot show my face because of my father. So I published the picture, and 1 week later, I received another picture of herself, big smile on her face, and saying that my father got to follow the campaign. And he came to me and he said that, so you're following the campaign as well. So, and then the father actually started to talk with her daughter in her house. And then he found that if my daughter is going to take a picture of herself from her back in stealth, in secret, without me knowing that, it's better I be involved in this movement. So the father took the picture of her daughter and sent it to me with a new, you know, new actually movement, because I published that and I said that this is a father. So if you, so far, if, I mean, there were a lot of father who thinks that this is against my honor if my daughter is unveiled. So we created a new movement, invite all the fathers to talk about it. And from the beginning, all was just picture, all were like, you know, conservative from back, or not brave to speak up in front of the camera. But right now we see how culture is changing, men getting involved, old generation getting involved, fathers getting involved. And now it's women putting the headscarf on stick in public and talking loudly, facing the camera, talking about it. That is why I know it's slow. I know it takes time, but if we are patient enough, we have to understand that we are actually changing the culture through our conversation, through our debate, and through involving people getting engaged in the movement. So that is why I'm always hopeful, and I think we're actually doing something. That is why the governments are attacking us. That is why actually, you know, they really care about the social, the movement, the online campaign. They really care about not just the government in my country, even in America as well. When you see that, you know, all the politicians using Twitter, using social media to be present, to challenge this society, that means they really care about social, cultural change. They really care about the power of every individual person who uses social media to be their own voice and to be their own agency.
Thank you, Masih. Thank you for sharing that, and with a fantastic closing to the session. Sorry, we're a bit over time, but that's okay. It was, anyway, an interesting discussion, and I hope we can continue doing that in some or the other form. So thank you so much for watching us. Thank you so much for joining us from different time zones, friends. We will create a recap blog of this session. And if you have any further questions that were unanswered or you want to deep dive into, please write to me or tweet us, and we will get responses from all our speakers separately and make sure that we are captured it in the recap blog. We will see you in the next month's MobLab Live. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and a newsletter dispatch to learn more about the topic and the date and time for the next session. Thank you so much, Masih, Dr. Paul, and Dr. Jenkins for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fabulous.
Yeah, it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You have a great day.
You too.
You too.